Begin today the Gemara on Daf Chaf Aleph from the base, 3 lines up from the bottom of the Yomad. Amru loy le Rabbi Akiva. So in the Mishnah, there's the discussion regarding a person that makes a Shavuos not to eat. Rabbi Akiva says he's not allowed to eat even a mashu, the tiniest amount. And Chachamim argue with Rabbi Akiva and say, where do we find such a thing? Whenever there's anything that's forbidden to eat, the amount is always a kezayis. So why is this any different? So the Mishnah's lashon was, Amru loy le Rabbi Akiva. The Chacham said to Rabbi Akiva, Heicha metzina chulo. Where do we find such a thing that there's a share of eating less than a kezayis? So here Tosfos explains that the main question that the Chachamim are asking is, Chachamim agreed to Rabbi Akiva that when it comes to a neder, it doesn't necessarily go by a share of any size in any other place. We go by the das of a person, whatever the person is thinking. But if you never find the Isra of Achila that's less than a kezayis, then shouldn't we assume that when he said, I made a shvur that I will not eat, that he's referring to what we define as eating, usually by any other Isra? So the Gemara says, but for loy, is there no other place where we see that the Isra of eating is less than a kezayis? If a person eats a little ant, which is not a kezayis, and nevertheless, he'll be chayiv malchus for this. We learned this in Masechta Makis. Answers the Gemara, Beria Shani. If it's a full creature, the way the Eibusha created it, that's different. There, you're chayiv for less than a kezayis. But over here, in this case, where the person is making a shvuah, and it's not a beria that he's eating, over here it's not necessarily going to be less than a kezayis. In fact, the Gemara, Vaharei Hektish. How about regarding Hektish? By Hektish, the Isser of having a noah from Hektish is not a kezayis. If there's a value of a shava pruta, that's what we go by, but it could be even smaller than a kezayis. So we see there is such a case. And so the Gemara, yeah, you're right, it's not a kezayis, but habein and shava pruta, it's not just a mashu, it's not the minutest amount. It has to be some value. Over there we don't go by the size, but we go by the value of a pruta. In fact, the Gemara, but v'harei mefarish. Here regarding shvu itself, if a person clearly says that I'm making a shvu not to eat even a mashu, so then he'll be chayiv. Not even if he eats the smallest amount. So how could he say that we don't find such a thing? And says the Gemara, Mefaresh nami keber yadami. If a person explicitly says he's not going to eat even a mashu, then just like by a beria, the reason why when you eat a full creature that you're going to be chayiv is because of the significance of it being a full creature. Same thing when a person specifies and says that he's not going to eat a mashu, by him saying that, so he's saying that for me this mashu is also chashuv, and I don't want to eat even this mashu. Therefore, it's the same like a beria, so that's different. Like the Gemara, Vaharei Afar. How about in a case where a person makes a shvu and says, I'm not going to eat any earth, which is not, in other words, he's not going to eat earth, which is not even edible. And in such a case, because it's not edible, the isser of not eating is not a kezayis. Kezayis refers to something which is edible, but if it's not edible, then even less than a kezayis is also. So you see that in such a case, the isser is for less than a kezayis. So says the Gemara, Elo, if you're going to tell me that we don't find, and it's always a kezayis, so tifshet boy Rava. So we could resolve the shaila that Rava asks, and this is here in the next Amud, where Rava asks the shaila, shvuah shaloi oichol ofar, as the Bach adds here. If a person makes a shvuah and he specifies, my shvuah is not to eat earth, and va'achal ofar, and he goes and eats from this earth, bekamo, how much of the earth does he have to eat in order to break his shvuah? Is it a kezayis, like eating food in general? Over here, because it's earth, even less. So tifshait ad ika kezayis. So we should resolve and say that it's only if it's in the amount of a kezayis. Since in the Mishnah, the Chacham is saying we don't find less than a kezayis. And says the Gemara, no, ki kamrinon b'midi debar achila kamrinon. The Chacham was saying we don't find regarding something which is edible that the isser would be less than a kezayis. Over here, the afar is not edible, so therefore it could be there that the isser applies even less than a kezayis. The last case the Gemara asks, Vaharei koinam mois, but if a person says a koinam, which is a neder, a person says that this loaf of bread should be a koinam, which means that he's saying that it should be osir to him like a carbon. So in that case, the halacha actually is, and everybody agrees to this, that he's not allowed to eat even a kolshu. This is coming later over here. The Gemara soon is going to explain this. Even the Chacham agreed to this. So we see that there is a isser that's less than a kezayis. And says the Gemara, koinam mois is nami kemefarish dami. When a person says a kainam, that it should be also to me like a carbon, it's just like he explicitly said less than a kezayis. Why? Because when a person says kainam kikazu alai, this loaf of bread should be to me like a carbon, he never used the term achila. The whole discussion we're having over here is when a person uses the term achila, usually achila means kazayas. But by kainim, he didn't say kazayas, the term achila, so therefore it's like he clearly said that he wants it to be also even less than a kazayas. Now, what does Rabbi Akiva respond to the Chachamim? Amar lehen, Rabbi Akiva says, Heichon matzinu b'medaber or maybe carbon. Where do we find here? We see this is different. Where do we see such a thing that a person says words and then he doesn't keep his word and he has to bring a carbon? Shazem medaber or maybe carbon. This person says a word and he has to bring a carbon. So since this is a different thing that he says words, so therefore over here we go by the word that he says, and therefore our assumption is that his das was that it should be even usher for him less than a kazayas. Okay, but the Gemara asks on the lashon here that Rabbi Akiva says, where do we find such a thing? Where do we find that words, just saying words, causes to bring a carbon? V'lo, is that not true? V'harei megadif. A person that blasphemes, is, in other words, mevarach has Hashem, as Rashi says, the opposite of blessing Hashem's name. And according to Rabbi Akiva, as Rashi brings it from the Gemara in Krisis, that he's chayiv to bring a carbon. And in that case, it's words that causes the chiyuv of the carbon. And says the Gemara, no, what Rabbi Akiva was asking is, medaber v'oiser kamrinan, that a person says words, and the words cause an iser, and then if he doesn't keep that, then he has to bring the carbon. V'hai medaber v'choytuhu. By the megadef, as soon as he says the opposite of blessing in Hashem's name, that itself is the sin, and therefore he brings a carbon. That's not the chiddush that's not what Rabbi Akiva was referring to. Over here we're talking about a dibur, where the dibur itself was nothing aser, but then later he doesn't keep his dibur and he has to bring a carbon. That's what's different over here. But the Gemara says there's another case. V'harei nazir, maybe karbani al dibur, maybe v'harei nazir. I read over here. V'harei nazir, maybe karbani al diburai. No, that's already the answer. Sorry, v'harei nazir. By the nazir, what happens by nazir? He accepts upon himself a nazirus, and then what happens at the end of his nazirus? He has to bring karbanis in order for him to be able to end his nazirus and eat again from what he wants, and so on. So we see that it's just words. That's how a person becomes a nazir. And says the Gemara, no, maybe karbani al dibure kamrinan. Here, Rabbi Akiva was saying, where do we find that a person brings a carbon for the words that he says? For high, by the nazir, he doesn't bring karbanis because of the words that he said. Maybe carbon lishtaruya lechamrahu the kamaisi. He's bringing carbon to end his naziris, and now in order to be allowed to drink wine again, so he's bringing a carbon for that heter of the wine. So the point of the carbon is to be mat to the wine, not because he said words that itself obligates a carbon. But what's with the case of hektish? A person is makdish something and it becomes hektish, and now if he by mistake goes and uses it me'ila for his own benefit, then by me'ila you have to bring a carbon. So we see as a result of the word that he said, it becomes hektish, and then that will lead him to have to bring a carbon. So it's also all because of the power of his word. Answers the Gemara, but that's still a case that's different than what we're talking about over here. Oiser la'atzmei kamrinan. The chiddush in our case is a person says a word of a Shavuos where he asks something to himself, and if he doesn't keep it, he has to bring a carbon. V'hai oiser al kol ha'olam kuloi. Who? When a person is makdish a behemah over here, what happens? The behemah becomes hektish, it changes its status, it becomes hektish, and it's not something just for him. For the whole world, it changes the status of this behemah. And in such a case, if you moil of a behemah that now belongs to hektish, you bring a carbon. The last case the Gemara asks, Harei kainimus. In the case of kainimus, again, as mentioned before, a person says that this object or this behemah should be like a carbon. So he's asking this for himself like a carbon. And at this point, so the Gemara here is thinking, and there is such an opinion actually, that for kainimus, if you have a hana of this kind that you said should be like a carbon for yourself, just like by me'ila, by kachim, you have to bring a carbon. So to here, if a person does have a hana from this that he says that it should be like a carbon, then he'll have to bring a carbon for that as well. So we see that even for something that he asks for himself, there's another example where you bring a carbon. Answers the Gemara, Kasava, Rabbi Akiva holds, Ein me'ila b'kainimus. That there's not the concept of me'ila, that if you misused it, you had a hana from it, and you have to bring a carbon, does not apply to kainimus. It only applies to something that you designate as a hektish for everybody. Okay, now the Gemara will explain the machlokes here between the Chacham and Rabbi Akiva, that there are cases where everybody agrees. Omar Rav Machloikes Bestam. The argument is if a person says a shvua shaloi eichel, shvua that he will not eat. So the question is, does that mean a kazayas or even a mashu? Aval b'mefarish, if the person is explicitly saying that he's not going to eat even a mashu, so divrei hakol b'kol shuhu. Everybody agrees that the shvua takes effect and he doesn't eat, he's not allowed to eat even that kol shuhu. My time, what's the reason? As the Gemara already mentioned before, mefarish nami keberi domi. If you're specifying even a kol shuhu, so that means that you're saying that is significant. Therefore, it's like a barrier. We even a little tiny creature like an ant, but because it's a full creature, it has significance. Another case where there's no argument. They're only arguing if the term that he used in the shvua is a shvua that I will not eat. The term achila. If he didn't use the term achila, he says I will not taste. Everyone agrees that not to taste includes even not to taste a tiny drop. Like the Gemara Pshit, this point seems to be obvious. Te'ima. Te'ima means not to taste even a drop. And says the Gemara, no, ma'od te'ime, litem nami, kedamri enchi. Even the term of te'ima is also the way people speak when people say, come, let's taste this together, or let's join in tasting this. It means eating. So even the term te'ima would mean a kazais. Again, what?
He has to put it in the mug.
Yeah, correct. So kamash malan. So therefore, it's saying that no, if you don't use the term achila only te'ima, everybody agrees that it's a kol shuhu. Rav Papa says machlokes b'shvuos. The argument here, whether a kol shuhu would be included in asr as well, that's only if it's an oath. Aval b'kainamais, but in a case where a person says the term of kainam, that this bread should be to me like a kainam, which means it should be also to me like a carbon, that's a neder, divrei hakol b'kol shuhu. In this case, since he does not mention the term achila at all, everybody agrees that it becomes asr to have a na of it altogether, even a kol shuhu. As the Gemara explains here, my time, kainam is nami kivin the lekamit kashmad achila. When you say the term kainam, he didn't mention the term achila. So it's like he explicitly said that it should be completely asr, even a kol shuhu. So Meisvei, the Gemara asks on this, it says in the Braisa, Shnei kainamois, if a person makes a neder on 2 loaves of bread, he says this loaf of bread should be asr to me, and he uses the term kainam, like a carbon, and another one. Mitztarfen, you can combine a little of this one and a little of the other one together to the amount of a kazayas, that if he eats a kazayas, then he's over on this neder. Shtei shvuos ein mitztarfos. But if it's 2 shvuos that he makes on 2 loaves of breads, then you don't combine them together to come to the amount of a kazayas. And so the Gemara understands now that he said the term of achila, I make a shvua not to eat this bread, and another term of achila and the shvua not to eat another bread. So they're separate. So you can't combine them. Rab Meir says, kainamais k'shvuos. Just like by the shvua, when you use the term shvua, you don't combine one bread on another bread to come to the amount of a kazayas. By the term kainam, it's the same thing. You can't combine to come to the share of a kazayas. The isra will be only if you eat a full kazayas from one of those breads. But now the question is, according to what Rav Papa said before, if when a person says the term of kainam, since he didn't use the term of achila, so then he's chayiv even for the tiniest amount. So then lama lilu tzaref. What's the whole discussion here? What's the argument between the Tanakam and Rab Meir whether you could combine the 2 breads for a kazayas? There's no need to combine anything. Answers the Gemara. Here, this kainam that this Braisa is speaking about is not the kainam that we were speaking about before, because here the Omar achila mizu alai kainam. Eating of this on me should be a kainam. So usually the term kainam is just, you don't say the word achila, because kainam is like every neder, which refers just to the object. You're saying this object is kainam. And then automatically you're not allowed to eat from it. But over here, he did say, achila mizu alai kainam. And he said again, achila mizu alai kainam. And therefore, he used the term achila, so you need a kazayas in order to be over on this neder. And that's what the discussion over here is, whether you can be mitzaref of the 2 breads or not. But if that's the case, why then, according to the Tanakame, should you combine the 2 breads to the amount of a kazayas? Because zillah hacha lekashiyura, zillah hacha lekashiyura. If you look at this bread, there's no shir, and the other bread, there's no shir. If he said very clearly, kainam achila, what's the lashon over here? Kainam alai, achila mizu alai kainam. So he clearly said, from this bread, Achila, a kazayis, is asar on me. And from the other bread, a kazayis is asar. So how are we combining these two different nidarim that he made on these two breads with the term of achila? So the Gemara changes. The Gemara says, the Omar, what this person said is, achila mishteyen alai kainam. Eating from both of these loaf of breads should be also to me with this neder, with this kainam. So in that case, even mitzaref, it's one neder that combines both of them together. So the Gemara asks on this, how could he say that? The chvasa gabi shvuos. If so, the Tanakama that's contrasting, and he's saying that we don't combine. Sorry, by the kainam we do combine. By the shvuos we don't combine. So what's the difference? Because now by shvuah, when he's making a shvuah, you're gonna have to say that it's a shvuah with the same kind of a language. The alma shvuah shaloi oichel mishteyen. Person says a shvuah that I'm not going to eat from both of these together. So then amayim mitzdarfen. If that's the expression that the person said, so then why would I not combine them? So therefore the Gemara changes and says, Amar Rav Pinchas. Rav Pinchas explains that there's a difference between a shvuah and a kainam. And the way Rashi explains this, the language that the person used here when he made the shvuah on these two loaf of breads, or he said the kainim on these two loaf of breads, is not like any of the cases that the Gemara was trying to say. Not he explicitly said the term of achila on one and then a term of achila on the other where they're clearly separate. Not he said mishteyen where they're clearly one shvuah or they're one neder together. Rather he used the lashon of shvuah mizu and mizu, or a kainem mizu and mizu. He didn't use two terms of achila, but he also didn't say mishteyim as one. He said mizu and mizu. Now the question is, do I combine the two or not? So Rav Pinchas says that there's a difference between shvuos and kainem. Why? Shani shvuos. By a shvuah, it's different that I say that you can't combine it. Because mitoich shechalukas lechatois, just like I find that regarding a carbon chatos, that if you made a shvuah with this expression, mizu and then mizu, that I don't combine it for a carbon chatos, he's going to have to bring a separate carbon chatos for eating from one bread and then eating from the other bread. This is based on the next Mishnah here, where it says that if a person says, I'm not going to eat this loaf of bread which is wheat, and this loaf of bread which is from barley, and this loaf of bread which is from spelt, then he's going to be chayav for each one separately. The same thing if he says, I'm not going to eat from mizu and mizu and mizu, and then he's over b'shoigig, so he's going to have to bring a carbon for each one separately. So just like I see that he has to bring a chatos for each one separately, so too regarding the amount of a kazayis, aim at starfais. They're not going to combine. Now over here it's going to come out lakula that we don't combine them because each one is like a shem isser for itself. Just like we find regarding the chatas. But that's only regarding the shavua. Regarding a kainim though, as Rashi here brings bariches, we don't find this. By a kainim, if a person uses this term of mizu and mizu regarding the breads, and then he has enough from both of them, behelam echad, with one lapse of awareness, it's going to be only one carbon for the me'ilah of both of them. According to the opinion that there's a carbon of me'ilah for kainamis, as we saw before, there is such a concept that even for kainamis there's a carbon for me'ilah. Or Rashi says, even if there's no carbon, regarding malchus, if a person gets one warning and he eats from these two breads, then he's only going to get one malchus. So since we don't find any division, not regarding chatas, not regarding malchus, regarding the term of kainamis, so therefore over there, we say that these two breads will combine, because they're considered to be one isser, one thing. Only shvuah is unique. Over there, it doesn't combine. And that Rashi brings the source. Why shvuah is different. It says, me ala achas, me ele. Okay. So this is the svara of Rav Pinchas. And as I mentioned, Rashi explains, this is when he says mizu and mizu. Here there's a distinction between shvuah and kainamis. Okay. The Gemara asks on this, Ihachi, Rab Meir. Let's understand what Rab Meir said. Rab Meir Oimer, kainamis k'shvuos. No, we do compare kainamis to shvuos, and that is that just like by shvuos, we say that you don't combine, by kainamis as well, you don't combine the eating of a kazayis of both of these loaf of breads together. So the question is, why not? According to the svara that Rav Pinchas just explained, regarding shvuos, you don't combine. If I see that they're divided regarding the fact that you bring two different karbanis, so it shows it's like two different isurim, so you don't combine for the shir of a kazayis. But elokainim is amayloi. But for kainim is where you see that there's no division between them. It's like one isser, even with this language of mizu, but it's like one isser. So then why shouldn't you combine regarding the shir of a kazayis? Answers the Gemara, Eipach. So you're right, there's no svara to say this. So we have to switch over here that Rab Meir said the opposite. Rab Meir said, Shavuos ke kainim is. That actually compare Shavuos to kainim is. and I say that just like by kainamis, I combine the two together, so too by Shavuos, I could combine these two loaves of bread, that it makes up for one kezayis. And the less later of Pinchas. It is not all of the svara of Rav Pinchas. Just because we find regarding chatos that you bring two karbanis, that's not enough of a reason to say that it's like two separate isurim that I can't combine. Let's say if you have chaylev and dam, you have forbidden fats and blood, you don't combine these two together. But over here, it's the same isser, even though regarding chatas, there's a limit of a pasuk that you divide them for two karbanis, but it's considered to be the same isser, and therefore you still could combine them. That's the point that Rav Meir is saying. Ravina Omar, now Ravina says a different shot. Going back to the original question the Gemara asked there, that Rav Papa said that the whole argument about the kol shuhu is only regarding Shavuos, but not regarding kainamis, because by kainamis he's not using the term of achila. And over here in this Braisa, we clearly see that it's discussing combining to a kazayis even by kainamis. So Ravina answers to that, Ki ka'amar Rav Papa. This that Rav Papa said, that by kainamis there's no combination, by kainamis there's no need for a kazayis, that's le'inyan malchus. That's only regarding the fact that you would get malchus even for a kol shehu. And Kitanya Ahi, this Braisa that says that even for kainamis you do need a kazayis, as we see, that you have to combine to get the kazayis, a linear carbon. That's regarding a carbon. And what is it being combined for actually? The combination here that it's talking about is not for kazayis. Because over here it has to be combined to the amount of a shava pruta. Why? Just like you find by me'ila, as was mentioned before. When you moil by kachim, what's the amount for the minimum amount for me'ila? A shava pruta, not the value of a shava pruta, not the amount of a kazayis. Similar over here, when it says shvua and it says kainamis, so over here, regarding kainamis, we're following here the opinion that's saying that even a kainam is chayav a carbon. So the question is, regarding the kainamis in this braisa, it's saying that it would be chayav a carbon, and it's discussing, could you combine from two breads to the value of a shava pruta? That's what this braisa is speaking about, but not regarding malchus. So basically, according to this answer of Ravina, it comes out that the Tana of this Braisa holds that even by kainamis, which is not a regular hektish, it's sort of a personal neder that this should be also to me like a carbon, there's an inyan of me'ila and you would be chayav a carbon. That's what it's referring to here. So the Gemara asks on that, how could he say that this is the case? Lememre, the savri Rabbanan yesh mila b'kainamis. Shall we say, based on this pshat, that Rabbanan are of the opinion that the concept of me'ila, similar to hektish, applies over here to kainamis, that you'd be chayav a carbon, and that's what the Braisa is addressing. But Vahatanya, we learned clearly in a Braisa not so, because it says, a person that says, kikar zu hektish, this loaf of bread should be hektish. So that's a regular hektish. He's designating it as hektish. And then vachola, he went and had enough from it, he ate it. So bein hu, bein chavere, whether he ate it himself, whether his friend ate it, mal. The din of meila applies like that's hektish. And lefichach, since this is something which is hektish for everybody, it's a regular hektish, yesh lo pidyon. The halacha of pidyon, that you can redeem it, and then the hektish goes over to the money, will apply. Over here, as the pasuk says regarding hektish, as Rashi brings the pasuk, it's actually in this week's parasha, opada be'ekecha, that you redeem when you have a regular hektish. The Torah gives you the ability to redeem it. However, if it's a case where a person says kikerzu alai hektish, that this bread, not that it's hektish, it should be asa to me like hektish. That's the concept of a kainim. It's a neder that he makes for himself, that it should be asa to him like hektish. So then, in such a case, harehu mal chaveroi loy mal. So he's going to be moil, but his friend is not moil. So for him, it's also to have a na, but his friend, it's not also for him to have a na from this. And lefichach ein la pidyon. Over here, the halacha of redeeming it from hektish, for that applies to hektish, does not apply, because there's no concept of redeeming regarding a isser, regarding a isser of a neder. There's no such a thing as redeeming. Divrei Rav Meir. This is Rav Meir's opinion. Chachamim oimrim. Now the Chachamim say, bein hu or bein chaveroi loy moal. In such a case, not he and not his friend, it's not shaykh to say over here the concept of me'ila. While if you say me'ila b'kainamis, there's no such a thing as me'ila b'kainamis. Me'ila would mean that you would be chayav to bring a carbon. Only you, not your friend. That's what Rav Meir said. But Chachamim say no, the concept of me'ila does not apply by kainamis. It's a neder, it's also to have a no from it, but not the concept of me'ila. So I clearly see that Chachamim don't even hold of this concept of a carbon regarding kainamis. So how could Ravina explain the Braisa before that when it's discussing regarding combining to the amount of a shava pruta for a carbon regarding kainamis, if according to the Chacham there's no such a thing? Okay, so now the Gemara suggests to say that this brisa that we just quoted, we have to switch the opinions. Eipach, switch over here the opinions and say that the Tanakama, which is Rab Meir, he's the one that said echad zeh ve'echad zeh lo yima'al lefi she'ei me'ila b'kainemis, that there's no me'ila over here, not for the person himself and not for anyone else, because there's no me'ila by the term of kainemis. Divrei Rab Meir. Rab Meir says there's no me'ila by kainemis. But that it's a personal neder, so it becomes like hektish for you, and there is a me'ila for this. And chaveira is someone else, there's no din of me'ila, and he does not bring a carbon. So therefore, we could still say that the chachamim in the brayse before that we're discussing combining the amount of shava pruta regarding kainemis is regarding a carbon, because chachamim over here, if we switch the opinions, hold that there is an inyan of a carbon for kainemis. But the Gemara asks, this doesn't solve it, because even in the brayse before that was discussing this regarding kainemis, it wasn't only chachamim. Rab Meir there responded to that, and Rab Meir said that no, that kainemis k'shvuos. So even if you're switching the opinions here, but if there's no inyan of kainemis according to Rab Meir, so how are we going to explain what Rab Meir is saying in the brayse before regarding this? Ihachi Rab Meir, then when the brayse says that Rab Meir said kainemis k'shvuos, that I compare the expression of kainemis to shvuos, that just like by shvuos I say that it doesn't combine, so to kainemis. Kainemis, it's the rufiu de mitzdarfi. So what's Rab Meir saying? That by kainemis you can't combine for a carbon. You have to have a separate shava pruta for each one, because according to Ravina's pshat, the brayse is talking about a carbon. That means Rab Meir is talking about a carbon. But ha me'ila ispahu. But there is a halacha of me'ila to bring a carbon. But according to what we just said, v'ha Rab Meir ein me'ila b'kainemis klal. That Rab Meir just said that there's no concept of me'ila regarding kainemis. So why is Rab Meir discussing the fact that you can't combine by kainemis if there's no inyan of a carbon b'chlal? So we didn't really solve anything over here. Even if we switch the opinions, there's no me'ila for kainemis according to Rab Meir. So the Gemara says, no, the way to understand what Rab Meir is saying is l'divrayim de Rabbanan kamalu. When Rab Meir is arguing on the Rabbanan, he's saying to the Rabbanan something according to their opinion. And he's saying as follows: Lididi, my opinion is ein me'ila b'kainemis klal. You're discussing whether you could combine for a carbon, for shava pruta, for kainemis. So Rab Meir says, I disagree with this whole entire premise. There's no concept of a carbon for this term of kainemis. But even according to your opinion, that you say that there is a carbon for this, but you should admit to me, the kainemis k'shvuah, that kainemis is like a shvuah, that we're not going to combine the kazayas of 2 loaves of bread, that he should be chayav a shvuah. He's going to have to eat from 1 loaf, a full amount of a shava pruta for the carbon. That's what he's saying to the Rabbanan. But Rab Meir himself, as we saw in the second brayse here, after the Gemara switched the opinions, Rab Meir himself holds that there's no carbon by kainemis. And the Rabbanan respond to this, as the Svar that the Gemara brought before already, Shavuos, Ikeder of Pinchas. By Shavuos, the reason why we don't combine a kazayas from the 2 breads, like the Svar of Rav Pinchas, just like we find regarding a carbon chatos, that it's separate. So too, over here, regarding a shvuah, when a person was over b'mezid, for Malchus, it's also going to be separate. And by kainemis, lekeder of Pinchas. But regarding kainemis, and here, regarding kainemis, it's regarding a carbon. Regarding kainemis, to bring a carbon, so over here, you don't have the svara of Rav Pinchas, it's 1 carbon for both of them, and therefore, the kazayas does combine from 2 loaves of bread to be chayav a carbon. Okay, now here the Gemara brings 3 different ibayas regarding what was discussed, the shear of how much does a person have to eat in order to be over on the shvuah that he said he's not going to eat. And then it begins with the first ibay, which was already mentioned before. So Amar Rava says like this: Shvuah shaloi oichel va'achal afar potter. A person makes a shvuah, I'm not going to eat. And then what does he eat? Earth, which is not edible. So then he's potter. It's clear that's not what he meant to say in his shvuah, that he's not going to eat earth. It's not edible. But Boy Rava, the shaila of Rava was, if the person specified instead shvuah shaloi oichel afar, that it's a shvuah that he's not going to eat any earth, bekama. So then, how much does the not eating earth mean? So he clearly said not to eat earth, but how much? Since he did use the term of achila, I say daitei kazayas. So he's using the term achila to say, since achila always means a kazayas, according to the Rabbanan, over here as well it means a kazayas. Or do I say, Kiven the loy midi the achli inshihu, since earth is not something that people eat, so b'cholshu, even with the term achila, it means he's not going to eat even a kolshu of earth. So even if he eats just a kolshu, he'll be chayiv. Teiku, this ibaya remains unresolved. Another ibaya similar, ibaya rove shaloyach or chartzon. If a person makes a shvuah and says, I will not eat the grape seeds. So bekama, what's the shear to be over on this shvuah? Do I say, Kiven the misachal al yedei taruve is daitiya kazayis? Since when a person eats grape seeds, the grape seeds are not usually eaten itself, it's eaten together with the grape as well. So therefore, it's like the grape itself where the shear of achila is a kazayis. So regarding the grape seeds, even though separately it's not edible at all, so his das is a kazayis. Since grape seeds for itself is not edible, people do not eat it separately. So therefore, if this person is specifying that I'm not going to eat grape seeds, he means that he's not going to eat these grape seeds, even a mashu, because in itself it's not something which is edible. So therefore, the shear of kazayis does not apply here. Teiku, this also remains unresolved. A third ibaya, similar, by Ravashi. Ravashi asks, Nazir sha'amar. A nazir which is not allowed to eat wine, grapes, or anything like that. Sha'ama that says shvuah shelo echel chartzan, a shvuah that I will not eat grape seeds. Now these grape seeds he makes a shvuah not to eat is anyways also for him to eat. He's a nazir, but then he makes a shvuah that he's not going to eat these grape seeds. So now bekama, what is the meaning of the shvuah? How much did he say? Did he mean to say that he's swearing not to eat from these grape seeds? Do I say kiv and the kazayis isura da'iraisahu? Since to eat a kazayis of these grape seeds, that's already awesome and not because he's a nazir. So kika mishtaba, when this person is swearing, why is he adding a shvuah here? It's because he wants to add something. A hatayrika mishtaba. He's adding to include even a smaller amount of a kazayis, which minatayra would be allowed. And therefore, v'daite amashu, he wants to add and say that he's not going to eat even a mashu from the grape seeds. So that's what a shvuah here is, and therefore the shvuah takes effect. Or do I say, but even when he said that he doesn't want to eat the grape seeds as a nazir, but he uses the term of oichel, that I will not eat, so daite kazayis. The word oichel means just a kazayis, and if that's the case, since it's already awesome in atayre, so saying a shvuah that I'm not going to eat a kazayis of it is not going to take effect. Why? Because ein iser chalal iser. It's already also from before. So this Gemara brings a raya. Says the Gemara, Toshama, I'll bring you a raya. This is a Gemara here that we had already before on Daf Chaf Aleph. Shvuah shalaychel, a person makes a shvuah that he will not eat. And v'achal nevelis reif t'shkotzim ramasim, and he eats any of these forbidden foods. Chayiv. So according to the Tanakama, he's chayiv for this. Rab Shimon, paiter. Rab Shimon says no, that he's pater. He ate from forbidden foods. You're not chayiv for this. The question was asked, how do we explain the opinion of the Tanakama? What Rab Shimon says makes sense. Why? Because amai chayiv. Why should he be chayiv here for the shvuah that he just made? Mush bava oimid mahar sinayu. Since he's eating these forbidden foods, where there's already a shvuah from Har Sinai that he's not allowed to eat. So now his shvuah that he makes does not take effect. And Rav and Shmuel, Rabbi Yochanan, the Amri, Rav, Shmuel, and Rabbi Yochanan all explained that the reason the Tanakama says this is because b'kailol dvarim amutarim and dvarim asurim. When do you say that a isser does not take effect on an existing isser if it's limited to what it was before? But if he includes more things with the existing isser, then it does take effect. So here he's saying a shvuah that he will not eat. It includes these forbidden foods and other foods as well. Therefore, it does take effect according to the Tanakama. However, Rish Lakish disagrees with this concept. He says this concept, which is called Issa Kailal, does not apply here. So the only way to explain what the Tanakama is saying is, it's only in the following. Either when the person made this shvuah not to eat, he specified clearly that he doesn't want to eat even a half a shear, meaning the Isser to eat any of these forbidden foods would be a kazayis. And then when he makes the shvuah, he adds, because he says he's not going to eat even a chatzi shir. And that's Val Liba de Rabbanon. That's according to the Rabbanon that say that when a person makes a shvuah, it usually means a kazayis. So only if he specified less than that, a half a kazayis, a chatzi shir, then the shvuah will take effect. And that's what the Tanakama was talking about. Or ibistam, Val Liba de Rabbi Akiva. Or as we learned before, according to Rabbi Akiva, any shvuah not to eat includes even a mashuhu. And therefore it takes effect because it's only aser, the amar, al the maisa atzma b'chol shuhu, and the person is asking on himself a kolshu, and this nevela from before was also only a kazayis, so therefore his shvuah takes effect, because he's now saying that it'll be also even a kolshu. That's how the Shlokish explained this braise here, this machlokes, or rather he's explaining the opinion of the Tanakama. Okay, but now the Gemara explains, now nevela the mushba v'oimid mahar sinaihu, this nevela that he eats after he made his shvuah, so there's already a shvuah from Har Sinai, and therefore it's also from before. The chichartzen legabi nozedamya. It's exactly the same like grape seeds for the nazir, where there's a issur for him already from before his shvuah to eat it. And now what did Reish Lakish say here? V'taime the parish. Reish Lakish explained that according to the Rabbanon, only because he specified clearly that a half a chatzi shir should be aser, then his shvuah will take effect. Holy parish, but if he did not specify that, daitei kazayis, then we say that his das was that he's not going to eat a kazayis from these grape seeds, even though it was already aser from before. So I clearly see that even though it was aser from before, since he's using the term achila, it means a kazayis, and therefore the shvuah will not take effect. That's what I see from Reish Lakish. So even though Rav Shmuel of Yechon had a different pshat in the Tanakama, but on this point of Reish Lakish, they're not arguing. So Shema Mino, this is a clear raya that the shvuah will not take effect. So now based on this, the Gemara wants to go a step further and says, Ella, if so, tivshoit the boy Rava. We should also try to resolve the first boy that Rava asked. What was the boy shvuah shalayachol afar bekama? A person makes a shvuah not to eat from earth. What does this term mean? Does it mean even less than a kazayis, because he's speaking about earth, which is not edible? Or do I follow the term achila, which means only a kazayis? So I should resolve and say, tifshoit the ad ikka kazayis. I should say that the term achila here means only a kazayis, and I could compare it to what we're learning out of here from this braise, the way Reish Lakish explained it regarding a nevela. Because the nevela called for damya. Nevela for a yid that's not allowed to eat nevela is just like earth. And what did the Reish Lakish explain? The time with the parish, and nevertheless I say only because he specifies a half a shear, then it'll be also less than a kazayis. But hole parish daite a kazayis. If he didn't specify it, even though it's like earth, but nevertheless it means only a kazayis because he used the term achila. So I should say the same thing regarding afar. If a person says I will not eat earth, that should mean a kazayis. But the Gemara says, no, you can't learn out from there. Loi, it's not the same thing. Afar lav bar achiluhu klal. When a person is speaking about earth, that's something that's not edible at all. If it's not edible at all, on that I say that it could be that he meant even less than a kazayis. Nevela basachila. Nevela is physically edible. Va'ar Yehuda revi'alei. But there's a lion that's lying there that's not allowing you to eat. In other words, the issur of the Torah is not allowing you to eat, but the physical nevela is possible to eat. So therefore, over here we conclude that the term of achila means a kazayis. Okay, I think we'll stop over here. The Mishnah starts in the Winyan, the next Talmud. Okay.